Today, for our first keynote session, let me introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Jeffrey Sharkey. Professor Sharkey has been the principal of the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland since 2014, where he has led Scotland's national conservatoire across the disciplines of dance, drama, music, production, and screen. In today's sessions, Professor Sharkey will address a question that is both timely and essential. Do we need a conservatoire in 2024? This question goes beyond the mere existence of such institutions. It challenges to consider who these institutes are for, what their purpose should be, and how they can continue to support and influence the art ecosystem, especially in a funding environment that may not always be supportive. So please join me in welcoming Professor Jeffrey Sharkey.
Thank you so much. So I'll be quick. Do we need a conservatoire in 2024? Nope. Thank you for coming. Let's get some coffee. In truth, we didn't always need conservatoires. They are Victorian inventions, late 19th century, mid 19th century. They were designed for utilitarian reasons. Paris needed marching bands. London needed people for an orchestra. Every American city found oil and steel and wanted an orchestra to make it a little bit more cultured, and a conservatoire was founded around it. There used to be over 100 conservatoires in the United States. There are 7 independent ones left. It's not necessary to have them. So when we're arguing for relevance, we need to think carefully. And I would argue that in the mid-20th century, some of our conservatoires, and I can speak mainly about my work in the United States, so I don't want to cast aspersions on amazing things happening in Asia, especially with all these young conservatoires starting. But they really became utilitarian. They became orchestrally focused. They had a model that worked pretty darn well. Get some really good teachers that know how to teach Galamian technique, link them to the Cleveland Orchestra, the Chicago Symphony, the New York Philharmonic, get that job in the New York Philharmonic, or get a teaching tenured job, partly because you need health care for these things. Composing, that was put a little bit to the side. They're a little bit weird. Maybe they should go to university. Let's focus on faithful recreation of someone else's music. And I argue that nearly killed the art. And we're only just getting that back now with conservatoires, not in any way seeking to use the root of that word, conserve, but to find a way to be more relevant to young people today, to societies today, and to finding a way of moving music more forward. In my country, and I can only speak for really Scotland and the United Kingdom, this is getting harder. And some of this came to me. I was in Orkney, one of the islands at the top of Scotland, and there's a famous stone circle, the Ring of Brodgar. And unlike Stonehenge, you can still go right up to the stones. And they are thousands of years old. And there are legends, which I like to believe, that they're built on these ley lines. I don't really know what ley lines are. I know some say that's pseudoscience, but these undercurrents of energy under which, or that, on top of which they built that ring, or the Callanish stones in Lewis, or the stones of Stonehenge, or the Tor at Glastonbury, a focal point for this energy. And that's something I like to think of a conservatoire of being, sitting on top of a ley line of an artist's journey. And what I fear now in my country is those ley lines are fracturing. It's a little bit like a Stephen King novel I read about the beam. The beam is fading. What can we do to restore that beam? And what I mean by that are the roots in to the conservatoire and the roots out of the conservatoire are at best changing, at worst fracturing. So I find myself, I got into this job to be a musician, and I have fallen in love with my other art forms that I have, the acting and the drama and the filmmaking and the prop making. And we can start, just in case my talk gets boring, I'll ask Anatai to start a slideshow, which just shows in the background the work of just last year that our students were doing. So you can see the kind of work that our students are putting on every year. And I find it helps myself, as it helps all of you that are running conservatoires, to remind ourselves why we're doing it. Because the yards are getting harder. Bernard knows I was just writing a very angry letter to our First Minister, which I will release on Monday when I'm back in Scotland, in case I'm put in prison or something like that, because they have removed promised funding to individuals applying once they graduate for project funding to research something, to make a CD or a modern recording, to put on a play. They've taken that funding that was promised. The previous First Minister promised an extra 100 million, and that's disappearing. And I know the context that budgets are tight. The Scotland budget is overextended. They have overspent. But I'm arguing on behalf of the arts. They have overspent because they've had priorities other than the arts. And the arts are too often a thing that's thought of as, well, if you have your health, you have your safety, your water's clean, your defenses are strong, then maybe you can have the arts. It's too often thought of as the last thing rather than the first thing. We can all make, and I will make, and I do make the economic arguments for the arts. Any pound invested in funding a young artist has the potential to deliver far more pounds in return with what that art generates, the work that it generates, the audience that it attracts, the restaurants that people might go to when going to that. Last night's wonderful performance, we were all eating at restaurants. We were having fish and chips. People were ordering beers. There's an economy around the arts. So you can argue on the economy level, but there's a much deeper level that we mustn't forget when we're doing this lobbying, and that is society and the sharing of human stories. And as I look in my home country of the United States, there's a rather exciting Democratic Party convention going on. I'm kind of excited by that, but the politics are fractured. If you're one party and not the other party, you barely know how to talk to one another. And that happened in the United Kingdom over Brexit. That happens in all of our countries over different challenges that are going on right now in the world. We have forgotten how to talk. We shout opinions. And the joy of music, the joy of drama, the joy of dance is it talks about our shared common humanity. Therefore, I think the arts are critical to stopping the fracturing of society. The last place you can be sure it's not artificial intelligence generated, if it's live performers in front of you. The last place where we will have a shared emotional experience. We all know when we laugh at a film, Deborah and I were talking about Hangover Part 2 for a number of reasons, like the hotel just across the way, but it's funnier when you see it with someone than when you watch it on your own iPhone. It's more powerful. The joys of sharing emotions are more powerful. Governments find that too easy to forget. So what this removal of funds has done is cast an instant depression on all of my faculty and on all of my fourth year students, on all of my graduating master's students, on all of my doctoral students, because they're thinking Scotland doesn't have a place for me. It doesn't want me to stay. It doesn't want to support my work afterwards. We're trying to address this internally. We've got a fund called Make It Happen, run out of our research department, where you can bid for £1,500. It's a start. It's something, this is the kind of thing that we need to do to make our conservatoires relevant, to give people the possibility of making their own work after. But the ecosystem is fraying, and that's in my country. And that's something that concerns me. Another thing that concerns me is the entry into the conservatoire. I am only funded for Scottish students. So compared to my sister schools in the United Kingdom, I feel it's unfair. They're funded for UK students. So I make a loss if I take an English student or a Welsh student. They don't. They get full level conservatoire funding. I keep making this case, but my Scottish government, which funds me, doesn't particularly care. I need to make that to the United Kingdom government more. But so as a result, Scotland is a nation of 5 million people, 1 million of whom are children. About 278,000 have access to lessons of some sort or another. These are run out of local authorities. Scotland only has one or one and a half what you might call specialist music schools, the St. Mary's in Edinburgh and Douglas, which is a state-run music school outside Glasgow. We don't have the independent school network that England has that has supported some high level of getting into the school. Uh, so we are worried about pipeline. And our junior department is probably the largest in the United Kingdom. We have 600 kids on a Saturday doing music. We have 450 kids on a Sunday doing dance, drama, production, and screen. So we are a 7-day-a-week school. And in the summer, while the graduate and undergraduate students are away, we are filled with short courses. We are trying to inspire. We are trying to grow our own. I lobbied the Scottish government along with John Wallace, my predecessor, who runs something called the Music Education Partnership Group, which everyone subscribes to. So it's a big entity. And we got into every party's manifesto, including the party in power, the SNP, that they would undertake to make lessons free. And we thought this was a real victory. It's turned out to be a Pyrrhic victory, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But the challenge that we have in Scotland, and it may be a challenge in some places in Asia, is that there's not a very large middle class compared to England, compared to the home counties around London. The National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain is largely the home counties around London. So it's very hard for people to afford an instrument. Until one guy moved up from the Royal Academy, we didn't have a single luthier, a single person to fix string instruments. You still have to send your bows to London to have them rehaired. We don't have a Benslow loan fund up in Scotland, which England has. So there are all these reasons that make it hard. The kids rely on finding an instrument. So MEPEG, the Music Education Partnership Group, is putting instruments in rural libraries. So it'll be an instrument lending library as well as a book lending library. And we said, please make it free because they can't afford the lessons. There were over 100,000 students in Scotland, according to our research, that wanted lessons and couldn't get them. So the government did allocate £12 million to make lessons free, but it didn't work. It didn't work because they had a fractured relationship with the local authority. They had not funded local authorities like Glasgow, like Edinburgh, like Dundee. So they were losing money. They couldn't afford rubbish collection. They couldn't afford pothole fixing. So they said, thank you for this new money. We'll use that now for the instrumental lessons. We'll take the money we were doing, which should have been added to this to make it free for more, and we'll fund our potholes, which they still haven't fixed. And we'll do everything. So it was a wash. It was not really a net gain. And the data collection is 3 years in arrears from local authorities reporting to the national government. So this, I tell you all this because this is something that I, as a principal, I'm a pianist and a composer. I didn't know I'd have to worry about data collection to think about how many students could have lessons, to think about my pipeline in 12 years' time from a local authority in Ayrshire. And in the meantime, local authorities are writing to parents saying, we're sorry, we can't afford these lessons anymore, or we can only afford wind instruments, or we can only afford traditional instruments. And I'm writing to local authorities, begging them to not give up, saying, how can we help? How can we partner with you? We have a beautiful partnership in Ayrshire, which is south of Glasgow, partly funded by our patron, who's now the king. He has a palace or a house he restored called Dumfries House. He makes that free for us. We work with 3 schools in Ayrshire that do group teaching. When they notice students that would benefit from small group teaching, they bring them to us. We give them that. We also do ballet in the gymnasium on the campus, and then some of them go to the juniors. That, to me, is a little microcosm of one beautiful little pipeline, and that local authority, where it's working in partnership with us, has just written to say they want to get rid of their teachers and have it run out of the leisure center. I don't know if a leisure center, which is in charge of pools and in charge of tennis courts, is going to nurture and pay for the teachers as they deserve to be paid. I hope they will, but it's a worry. And that's happening right, left, and center. So what do we do about it? Well, I'm seeking to make our students as curious and as collaborative and as label free as possible. That's one thing. So some of you know that about 10 years ago, we tried to really move forward in breaking down the barriers between dance, drama, production, film, and music. And we're getting better at it 12 years on. We've realized we threw too much at the students. We asked them to do everything they always did as an oboist and have time to learn to collaborate with a dancer and still work on a research project. And they were getting exhausted and ill, and the teachers were getting exhausted and ill. So we've tried to inculcate in our faculty what I was saying yesterday in our wonderful group, that you can't teach everyone everything. That is not our job. If we are on this ley line of a journey, or you get to the Ring of Brodgar and after, we're a fueling station of energy, of ideas. So we have simply tried to remove barriers and make our curriculum clearer. And there's still one of my favorite weeks. We call it Bridge Week, where we just give the conservatoire to the students. It's a little bit like what I feel we're seeing here in last night's production. Here's a technician, here's a venue, here's a budget, make something happen. What's your vision? And we've launched a lot of entrepreneurial groups that have come out of that. So that's one of the things we're doing. Another thing that we're doing is we're trying to make pedagogy a key part of everyone's learner journey. And again, conservatoires nearly killed this, at least in the United States. Conservatoires said, teaching, that's over there. That's music ed. That's maybe at a big university. That's not something you do if you're aiming to be in a quartet, if you're aiming to be an actor on the West End stage. Somehow we denigrated the most important thing, which is passing on to the next generation. And in doing so, we were in danger of ossifying those very teachers. And we all have seen teachers that have just become closed. We were talking about that. Suzanne was talking about that in her talk. Teachers that are used to doing it one way and have stopped learning themselves. So by teaching and playing, you get this virtuous circle, where one informs the other. And the final thing that we are doing is we're adding the word production and production values into everything we do. It's so natural in musical theater. It's so natural in our plays. It's so natural in our ballet. It's not natural in a piano recital, or it hasn't been. It hasn't been natural in an orchestral performance. So giving space and time for production to be considered along with the, the, the music itself is something that we are doing. And we're trying to bring, just as you are here, Anatai, with your students, we're not saying, come to us all the time, although we do, you're seeing 500 ticketed performances that we put on in our place every year, but we go out. We go out to the Highlands. We go out to caverns. We go out to abandoned railway stations, and we put on art in different places. So that's something. With the pedagogy, it's now part of every undergraduate's degree program. And I want, especially if they're Scottish, to have kind of an army of graduates that are able to perform, teach, produce. But I'm worried about that ley line. I'm worried about, will there be anyone that hires them to teach? Will there be anyone that funds their project at the other end? And that is a concern. Other challenges that we're having is just how we keep the doors open. You know, I think all the United Kingdom conservatoires are much more at the wall than we ever used to be. I think probably the London ones have deeper endowments than we have beyond the wall. But we're facing the kind of deficits I haven't seen. We're facing pay claims from a stronger union that I haven't seen before. So for the first time, I am dealing with 3 different unions in trying to debate pay. I am arguing with a government that's making it harder to get funding, more hurdles to get less funding. And we're trying to get much more engaged with fundraising, which some people don't have to do in some countries that are very well funded. Scotland is not used to doing this. It's not particularly wealthy, and the least wealthy part is the West, where our conservatoire is. If we were in Edinburgh, it would be a little bit easier for us to get that funding, but I think we'd be a much more conservative institution. So I'll stick with our creative poverty, but it is a worry, and that keeps me up at night. That keeps me up. That can I sustain? It'd be cheaper if we were a monotechnic, but we're the only one in Scotland. We need to be feeding the professions if we hold them as a value, that we want acting, that we want dancing, that we want filmmaking, that we want music making of all kinds, that we want trad. We need to do that. What else did I want to talk about? I want to talk a little bit about genre fluidity. Again, that's something that we live by, and again, it's something classical music nearly killed, because we were such snobs back in the 20th century. We said, come to us when you're ready. Come to our concerts when you know how to behave. Don't applaud between movements. Please don't bring your children because they're noisy. And that's not the way it was in Mozart's day. That's not the way it was in Beethoven's day. We built these temples of silence instead of temples of participation. And the other art forms haven't done that. So one of the secrets I found in Scotland that's joyous is, I said a bit of this yesterday, is the traditional music idea. It's so giving. Yes, it's Scottish, but it's also Irish. It's also Northern English. It's Danish. It's Appalachian, because the Scots went over to Appalachian and came back here. We've had students from Hong Kong join in, and it's, you have an idea, let's share that. Let's bring that in, and it's joyous. And Anatai was with me when we were presenting at the CEDAM conference, and we were talking about traditional musics in the region. I was with the great Anat, who talked about how he and colleagues are updating Thai music in the modern era. And what I have found, and I'm not a native Scottish traditional music person, but what I found joyous is the way our students are learning the original. They go to Solmarostag, which is the Gaelic-speaking college on the Isle of Skye, where we have a deep partnership. They can go to the digital archives. They can hear, like Bartók, the original folk song that was on the Isle of Lewis that woman sang while cleaning fish. And they can learn its background, they can learn its rhythm, and they can learn to sing it now. But they also are given permission, or gave themselves permission, to update those tunes, to update them with their own tunes, to update them with jazz rhythms or with different, even pop beats to it. And so I'll pause for just a second and play one of the examples. And these are a group of students that I kept using we all do welcome speeches and at our conservatoires, and I would have them play at the end of that welcome speech, and everyone would start dancing. It was a really great way for people to get together, and they formed a group called Trip. And can I switch to the iPad now? And I'll play it. It just makes you want to get up and dance, doesn't it? What I love is how that has woken up our classical musicians. We have more people now coming to us wanting, as classical musicians, saying, "Can I get a piece of that?" And they are learning traditional licks. I had a boy from Arizona who played the cello. He said, "Oh, can I bring some cowboy songs?" I said, "Sure, on you go." And he brought that in and he partnered with a Scottish guitarist and all these new cross-flowing rhythms. And then when they play a new contemporary piece or they go back and play Brahms, they're playing with a freedom that I haven't seen before they did that. And it's thrilling. So this is why we do it. Hey, can you show that little production video while I'm talking? So our production students are often behind the scenes, and at graduation we give them a chance to be in our Chandler Black Box Theater and just show the invention. I think it's the last slide, um, where they just show some of the amazing things that they make that can scare you. Um, or they could flip a house like anything because they can paint plywood to look like a marble countertop. They make our artists look amazing. And as I was saying yesterday, one of the challenges I have, again, with a population of 1 million children, is getting some of them to think, I'm good with my hands, I could do this. Because if they're talented at art, the high schools tend to push them to art college, to do fine art or to do graphic design, which is great. We need that. But we also need people that can make a spacesuit like that with robotics, that can paint in fluorescence, that can make horror films. I was talking to someone the other day that one of my favorite recent compositions was a kid who filmed a horror opera. Um, and so he wrote the music, got the kid to do the libretto. Our prop makers had people that looked like they had their throats cut. It was kind of scary. It was filmed on the set of a BBC soap opera, and it won lots of awards. And it was a 15-minute horror opera. And there's such a creativity in what these folks do, as much as what our violinists, our singers, and our actors do. So just while that's running in the background, I'll pause for one sec. There you go. So I guess a couple of more points, and then I'll open it up for discussion. Rhetoric matters. And it has been so depressing. Sorry, British Council representative, but it's been so depressing in the United Kingdom for the past 10 years, until now, I'll say, until now, because not a single politician of any stripe, of any party, has spoken up for the arts. They have, in fact, they've undermined the arts. The previous administration talked about a genuine problem the United Kingdom might have of too many universities that happened in the 1990s. That is potentially a genuine problem that should be addressed. But the way it was talked about was so-called Mickey Mouse arts courses. Mickey Mouse arts courses that aren't very good, that people do, and then they don't get a good job. And he didn't differentiate high-class conservatoire. He was only talking about salary, so none of our graduates, as far as I know, have gone into coming to conservatoire to make a high salary. But that is one of the key measures the United Kingdom is using to talk about was the degree worth it? Was it worth the money you invested because of the salary you get at the end of it? Now, I want our students to find gainful employment, but it's not about the high salaries. If that's what you're chasing, you're possibly going into the wrong profession. And that message wasn't clear. There was an overemphasis for the past decade on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. All important, all forgetting that a beautiful bridge can be well engineered and well designed. And that takes an eye. An iPhone or an Android phone has to function and look beautiful. And that takes an arts background as well. And the very society that the British government is worried is fracturing and fraying comes together through the arts. So for the first time, current Prime Minister has talked about studying the flute at Guildhall. And I cheered when I heard that because it was a leader that said this matters. Up in Scotland, I get tea and sympathy from the ministers, but all they're talking about is growing the economy from manufacturing, from getting businesses to locate. And I keep trying to say, have you read Richard Florida? Have you read how, communities are attracted to live in, are attractive to live in. Like Pittsburgh was transformed because of the arts and the creativity that brought. And they get it. So ultimately, they celebrate it. The Scottish government loves to promote Scotland on the world stage through culture, but doesn't love to fund what is going to feed that into the future, whether it's my conservatoire or whether it's education underneath. So that's the challenge I'm facing. And there are days where I don't know if I'm up to the task because I haven't found the donations. I haven't convinced the government to fund us on a level playing field, with England at least. I'm going to try with the new Labour government in the United Kingdom, and I'll try with the new Scotland office. I haven't found some of the major donors that fund Edinburgh but don't fund us because we're in Glasgow. I am trying to raise more money in the United States because, in some ways, it's easier to attract a US donor than it is a Scottish donor. And we're trying to do that. But these are all things that weren't in my textbook of how to be a principal or how to be a musician or how to be a human being. And they are new skills that we're constantly having to develop. And it sometimes seems like it's a steeper incline than it ought to be. Um, so that's where I wanted to leave it. Do conservatoires matter in 2024? I would say yes. I would say some of the very institutions that are in this room are trying to think about how can we be relevant to people, to the art form, and drive that forward with our young people together. That is the answer, not preserve, protect, and build barriers around it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Sharkey. And thank you for your information. And it's not just about like one institute or one organization, but it's about everyone until the government to make music more accessible to everyone, not just in the institutes, but also for people in the community. And also within the conservatory itself, it's like how you create the student to be entrepreneur and how the community will help them after they graduate, and also about your genre fluidity. I really love it, and it's really related to our universities. And tonight we're gonna have the concert called Music Odyssey, exploring Isan, which is the music from northeastern part of Thailand, and we're going to use their traditional instruments and combine it with like what you've seen in the video. And as I've mentioned before, it's not about one organizations or one institutes, but it's for everyone. And for this session, we can continue until 12 p.m. So if anyone got questions or anything, you can ask Professor after this. Thank you so much.
Well, happy to have not so much questions, but dialogue. I clearly don't have the answers because I haven't solved the problem, but I would welcome Peter.
Thank you very much for wonderful. Oh, sorry. So thank you very much for a wonderful expose of issues that we all face, not only us having to deal with the same issues that you have, but also teachers and students, the whole ecosystem of conservatories. Now, while I totally share your concern in terms of government funding, and I know Europe as a whole, and maybe the UK specifically, is in a dark place when it comes to public funding. But it is a worldwide problem. I was speaking to one of our colleagues the other day who has a similar job in the States. And that person was telling me that, well, basically, a lot of US institutions are fighting just to keep the lights on. We have a situation in Asia that is slightly different, but not.
Can I move here?
Oh, you could get here because of the food. The food and the climate are better than what you have. But it's not due to massive government funding. It's a different mindset. But also institutions, as you perfectly know, many institutions in Asia tend to be even more conservative. And some are doing a technology leap, like jumping ahead of what American and European institutions, and PGVIM is one of them, and I believe YST in Singapore is another one. But my question really, and I would like to hear your thoughts about this, how much of the challenges are due to government funding, which would be like structural issues, and how much is it due to the shifting nature of the professions themselves, of art itself? And I'm thinking, of course, about AI, but not only. It's demographics, uh, changes in communication,
Yeah.
the fact that we consume art through digital media rather than not. So, how much is that having an impact?
I would argue that that second, I forgot to mention that because there were too many things I wanted to talk on, but we are really trying to embrace, if not so much AI, but the growth of the film industry in Scotland. Scotland is the least populated part of the United Kingdom in terms of space and area. Maybe Wales is also there. But we've got a growth in film, and around that, you've got the gaming industry, which is big in Dundee, big in Edinburgh. So we are creating low residency masters around this. We're trying to use that as a positive. But you're right. What I don't want to be in a position is trying to fund a model of the past. Having said that, well, and Bernard's talked about this, the intensity that we all have, Deborah, you were saying 80% of the cost is people. And you're going to find a hard time getting away from that and still doing, on delicate territory, conservatoire level work. So our actors are in groups of 12, but the attention they get is not just on rehearsing a play, it's on voice work, on movement, on facial expressions, whatever that might be. Our dancers have individual work literally on their bodies, but incredible technique at the bar. It may not be one-to-one. In music, we are really pioneering with others, group teaching, especially at the younger ages. It's still a one-to-one basis on the whole, and I know some are talking about, can we do group teaching also at the conservatoire level in music, because it works in some of our other art forms. So I don't think it's because we're stuck in the old ways. I do think we have a funding model that is antiquated, even compared to south of the border with us in England. I'd be better off by about £1 million to £1.5 million if I was in Manchester compared to being in Glasgow, just at that level. So that's a key argument I'm trying to make, aside from the enhancement. The other thing is I want to be committed to being multi-arts. I feel that infuses and informs each other art form, but it's more expensive to be multi-arts. If it was just music or just drama, you don't have all the support around that to run those different things. So that does add cost, and that might have to be something we look at. Suzanne.
Can I ask two questions? And thank you very much for this. It was absolutely amazing. We're talking about the utilitarian concept of conservatoires when they were founded, which is still very much also present in our houses. We in Lyon, and we're absolutely not the only ones, have articulated our mission twofold. It's developing musicians and developing our art. So we see ourselves as a laboratory for the arts, and many of our institutions function like that. Often, this also has consequences for our relation with the labor market. I hope you remember that we presented when the AEC Congress was in Lyon, that we presented a session on how the orchestras with which we have programs together, orchestra masters, artist diplomas, change under the influence of these programs. So we don't think of the labor market as defining the criteria to which we have to shape our education, but we're in a constant dialogue, at least, with the labor market. And outside of that, we are creating a new labor market. That's how we see it. But often in funding, we bump into the utilitarian concept of even local governments, national governments, and sometimes European programs stating, okay, a very mechanical view on education. The labor market defines the criteria every 5, 10 years, and then you just change your programs to meet those criteria. So this is one of the things that in France at national level we meet and find difficult to answer and difficult to cope with, because you can't change those programs. You have to sort of slide your developmental objectives into it. So do you recognize this, and how can we act to
It's a really
change that?
it's a really good point, and I see in Scotland. Well, there are some ensembles that partner with us a little more naturally. So, for instance, the Scottish Ensemble is a string ensemble that often plays from memory and often has actors or dancers or a script that they're working from. They love working with us because we're kind of in their DNA. Our ballet company is really trying to embrace digital. So ballet dancers are having to look at facial expressions and study with our acting staff far more than they ever used to be. So it always was from a distance. But now there are movies of ballet, facial expressions, what the fingers look like. All that's important. But even the big orchestras, the RSNO, the great thing is the funding model that Scotland has for them, and they call it the touring banana because it's the shape of a banana. You start in Glasgow, go to Edinburgh, up to Dundee, up to Inverness, and then over to an island somewhere. And they take smaller forces on this banana, and those forces have to be good at engagement, teaching, communication. So we are talking with, well, do you ask for that at audition? Is it just playing behind a screen? Um, do you want only they're wonderful, but do you want only Russian graduates in your orchestras, or do you want some of ours that have these additional skills as well? So, in a way, we're moving with them. Some of those orchestras are moving faster than others. So, I'd say Scottish Ensemble and Red Note Ensemble are kind of where we live. But the Scottish Chamber Orchestra wants a deeper partnership with us, and that's exciting because they are probably, in some ways, the most traditional, outstanding excellent executants on their instrument, and I'm delighted they want to work with us. I think they're realizing they have to evolve. The RSNO would not exist if it wasn't playing for Hollywood films, and it's doing most of the modern recordings on them. So they have to know the recording environment, and that's something we're good at as well. So finding those commonalities is the way I try to do it with them.
Yeah. Thanks. The second question, you talked about a political environment, and it's not just a political environment, it's a social environment. And you talked in I thought, a very mild way, and about people not understanding the importance of the arts. I remember a colleague of ours from the States having to fight with his colleague from the medical faculty, for funding. And he found the slogan, "You save people's lives, we give people something to live for," which worked really well for his funding activities. And you said governments find it too easy to forget. And I'm wondering, aren't you putting it too mildly? I'm looking at the Dutch situation.
Yes.
And the first measure that the new Dutch government will take is simply raising VAT for all concerts, but even for journals, for books. And this seems to be a very simple economic measure. I'm absolutely sure it doesn't come from ignorance about what the arts mean to society. It comes from a very deep understanding of what arts means for societies, and the will to break that power.
The letter that I've drafted to First Minister Swinney is not mild at all, and I'm quoting directly the previous First Minister's promise of an extra 100 million, and I'm asking him to answer this. And it's very delicate because my wife teaches his nephew, but I'm still being pretty darn strong about it. We have done a tanks on the lawn thing in front of Holyrood when our drama funding was threatened. We lined up David Tennant and Shuti Gatwa and had the orchestra playing in front of them, and Fiona Hislop said, "Get your orchestra off my lawn." We can pull the stops out when we need to embarrass the government. I hate that it gets to that point that we have to embarrass them. Are you really going to do this? But I feel governments, the Dutch government sounds the same, our government, always fund what will get them the votes for the next election. And young children don't yet vote. Young children with instruments don't yet vote. And too often they have viewed, and this is so wrong, especially in Scotland, the arts as a middle class pursuit, as a high income level. What I've loved about the arts in Scotland is I see all socioeconomic areas at the opera, at the ballet, at um, at our concerts, and they're in casual clothes and they're bringing their kids. That's a really healthy ecosystem. That's something I had never had in the United States. Um, but it will fracture if they aren't exposed to it on a regular basis at a cheap price and in schools. So I will get louder. Bernard.
Thanks, Jeff, so much in there that's so rich. That last point I think is really telling, that often it's places where so much is going right, the joy of the positive is taken for granted. And so just how to get that message across, probably in the letter on Monday, that you're undoing a good thing is the risk, obviously. And it got me also thinking about the letter on Monday, because I do like In Conflict and Harmony that it's about the letter on Monday. It's not 10 years' time. And just that thought of how, when you talk about the banana, that obviously it's small groups that go everywhere. And is there any way to try and build the energy of the collective, which is also fundamental to Scotland, that even if the solo voice wasn't going to get funded, that funding should be available to the small group, and that would then celebrate the strength that you have in RCS, because you're relatively rare in the well, you are unique in the UK in terms of the diversity of your art forms. There are other places represented in the room that have equivalent elsewhere in Europe, for example, or beyond, but you have it very specifically and distinctively there. So just two thoughts. One about how much is good in Scotland in terms of that access, and the second one of how to build out of the crisis, as we heard yesterday, into a different solution.
That's a really good idea, a powerful idea of using that, the banana, or the fact that they want to bring the Isle of Lewis, the Isle of Orkney into the cultural milieu to fund the groups that can do it. Yeah. Chikong.
Thanks, Shai, for sharing. I think that you're doing a very tremendous job, in keeping things going in the in your school. I have a question about housekeeping, which is also about harmony and conflict. How do you preserve the kind of harmony that's going on within the school itself? Because I'm sure that all the departments, all the teachers, even maybe some of the students may be very concerned about the budget, the cuts, the funding, and then the future as well. How do you maintain the kind of harmony in order to continue the pathways that you have set for the school?
Yeah, good question. Thus far, we've been, knocking on wood, very lucky in being a very harmonious institution. We have sometimes fights over territory, land grabs for space, but we're trying to, allocate space in a kind of distributed model so that it's not who gets it first and takes the most. But the bigger issue, well, there are two issues. There are issues of faculty, making sure that they feel that they're part of this journey and that they can continue to learn and adapt. And there are issues of the student body and the students, and we have students in this room. The students can't help but be impacted by what's going on in the world around them, the economics of Scotland, but also, I don't really want this to get into a political discussion, but the swirl within the world. And what we try to do, and I know I have this in common with many colleagues here, we try to make our place a safe space for all to participate and come together, whatever their political differences or background. Before the current conflict, one of the things I was proudest of when we hosted ISME, is I help pay for the Palestinian Youth Orchestra to come to Glasgow, and we raise money for some scholarships for some Palestinian students to come through for free, and we were very proud of that. We took 28 Ukrainian refugees who were welcomed by 2 of our Russian acting students. Those were models that I thought were beautiful. And at this year's graduation, we honored Ivan Heng in Singapore, who was one of our graduates. He's a theater producer. And the 2 plays that he acted in were King Lear and The Cherry Orchard. And so our Ukrainian student spoke Chekhov in Russian. Now, this is a language he's currently not choosing to use right now, but the art allowed him and made him want to do that. So these are, I'm giving you good examples, but I've had a certain amount of protests from students that feel we should be making more overt statements about some of the world's political situations, and we have resisted doing so, and I'll keep trying to resist doing so. I will help anybody that needs help internally. We'll give them counseling, we'll give them advice, but one political statement that suits one group could easily harm a different group. So these are the delicate things that we're on about. It is getting more tense because of money. So literally, our faculty and staff are feeling underpaid because inflation has gone up and our salaries have only gone up this far, and our funding has been flat for 10 years and took a cut this last year. So if 10 years of flat funding with inflation, there's no way we can keep up unless we had less of them. And that's not yet somewhere that we've been ready to go at.
Jeff, I really appreciate the frankness. It feels a lot like Ireland in 2010, 2011, when we had a financial crisis, but we had the benefit almost of a financial platform where the IMF had to come in. It was a burning platform, in fact, whereas yours is a kind of a death by apathy, death by 1,000 cuts. But I wanted to make a couple of points. The first thing is my personal experience of the RCS is indeed, as you say, a thriving, vibrant organization where the public is coming in to concerts, they're coming in and mingling with the students. So your uniqueness as the only national conservatoire, the only conservatoire in Scotland, can't be denied. Um, the other thing that I'm very aware of in your discussions is we have a very good Irish golfer called Porrick Harrington, and work rate is his number one. That, you know, all of the levers you're looking to pull in order to sustain this institution, you're going through them all. And that work rate will actually eventually pay off because this sheer persistence and sustainability of that. Yeah, one of the P's. I think is hugely admirable, and I think it will. I think it will sustain. I hope your optimism. And the final thing, as I see students here, whenever we have dark days in the academy, and or I have dark days in the academy, I know the students want the institution to succeed. And I know they can't imagine doing anything else with their lives. So it makes me energized to solve whatever I can, even if I cause it myself and it's an internal problem. I know they want it to be fixed in the worst way, so badly. So I hope, you can sustain yourself for more. The other thing is musicians are wily, lateral thinkers. They are crazy creative people. So the governments and the people that you're working, in opposition to at the moment, they don't quite have the measure of you yet, I would say, because you have a lot of things that you can do and you can pull in order to eventually succeed.
Well, that's kind of you. Thank you for that.
Hi, Jeff.
Hey.
Firstly, as an alumnus of RCS, thank you very much for all the hard work that we've been doing. It's really a transformative experience, and really enjoyed my 1.5 years in Scotland. Maybe just 2 questions. Firstly, as a younger faculty member of RLYSD, understand that the funding situation in Singapore, we are quite lucky. So how can we continue to protect or even enhance the kind of funding opportunities that we have? And the second one is that understand that you're going through a lot of these troubles. How can we as a younger faculty prepare ourselves to handle all this in the future?
That's a really thoughtful question. Well, as it happens, I was brought by your dean to be a critical friend not long ago. And one of the things we were talking about was how to enhance that funding situation. Um, Even though you're generously endowed at YST, how to look at which you're already being very successful at. You've got fundraising goals and where are they going to come from and how can you grow that need. But as a young faculty member, all of you are the eyes, ears, and reputation of your institutions. You carry that with you. You may not realize it, but you are able to be part of that um, fundraising, friend raising, information raising, recruitment all the time. The connections and contacts you have, yes, one of them may end up being rich, and you might say, I do have this rich friend that, seems to own a company that might want to get interested. But the connections that you have, and by talking about what you love about your institution, that has ripple effects that you don't know in a few months' time, a few years' time, might bubble up to actual help. And the other real thing right now is thinking about um, your own agency in advocacy, advocating for your institution, advocating for your students. How do you do it? How do you try to have win-wins, not win-lose? I get more space, you get less. That's not necessarily a good way. How can you find something? I hear your problem. I can help you solve that, and maybe in doing so, help me solve mine. Those are muscles that you can work on as a young faculty member that would serve you incredibly well if you ever end up head of department or associate dean or running a place.
Thank you very much.
Back there?
Okay, thanks so much for your sharing. I think it's wonderful, it's very timely, and it's very meaningful as well. Well, I'm a colleague of Arno Tai as well, so I work in Scotland for some time and graduated from Edinburgh University.
Okay.
So really, I kind of really feel homesick to hear all these situations you're talking about right now. The question I would like to ask you is, well, you make a joke in the beginning of this talk and said, well, is conservatory still meaningful for 2024? And you say, no. I thought, it's a very bold statement you make since you're the president from a conservatory. I do wonder whether you might throw light on, could there be actually an alternative to this system? What you have suggested so far are from inside,
Yeah.
what we can solve from the inside. But is there any more progressive way we as a musician can do something outside this system? I want to make the question a bit more focused. You mentioned about the fluidity of genres. And if we include traditional music, in some Asian culture, to teach music in a traditional way would mean more holistic education. So not just music and art, but also other subject matters, health or maybe sustainability. So does it have implication for possibility of fundings if music no longer is being taught only within the conservatory system?
Well, no, that's the same controversial thing with my nope at the beginning. They weren't needed pre-Victorian era. I guess I would need to delve more into the history to think, did you have to be from a socioeconomic background before a conservatoire existed to be able to go to have lessons with the Kapellmeister, to be able to learn to improvise? Was that just for the privileged few who got to play in Haydn's orchestra, and how did they get there? You're right. If I was arguing for dismantling, which I'm not, I think they're good places, but they're expensive things to run. They come with high fixed costs of heating in Scotland or air conditioning in Asia, of if we could just swap, exchange heat and cool, of rain. We have to fix so many leaks in Scotland. But they're fixed costs of maintaining the infrastructure, and so much can get done away from that. And what I think conservatoires are best at is a gathering point of experts who may become teachers out in the community. I have seen amazing work on the Isle of Mull with one teacher that inspires every musician in Tobermory. And there doesn't need to be a conservatoire there. But that teacher has sent some students to us eventually as a potential goal. And I hope that teacher studied with us as well. So could the same thing happen? Possibly. But I worry that it wouldn't be done with the same level of attention. So it's like orchestras, they all have education programs and they do great work. And when they go, they can really inspire with their education director or the Benedetti Foundation, doing great work for a weekend. But that's not the same thing as sustained work over a period of time to get to a level of craftsmanship and expertise and to, over a period of time, learn from your sister student. That to me is one of the most important things. We're a reason for students of talent from around the world, from different disciplines, to come and hang out together and to learn together. And hopefully we teach them something too, we better, but really they teach themselves. And they come together for those 4 years or those 3 years or those 2 years, and they leave a little of themselves behind, and they take a little of the collective with them, and that's the ideal. So maybe it could happen, but maybe not with the same consistency, the same, as I said in my brief talk yesterday, 20% of our student body that's Scottish has to come from the poorest economic conditions. We have fought to fund them. If we weren't doing it, I'd wager they simply wouldn't discover a talent they never knew they had. Thank you.
Just one last, I'm not sure, sharing or comments, but I have a feeling that a lot of people, when you bring music out, and they always come to you, politicians or whoever, they always come and then congratulate you on the result, well done, but they don't actually know how we pay our bills, basically, and they don't know how sort of like the production costs. I'm not sure if it's going to be helpful to possibilities if they can be involved a bit more in the
Yes.
making of it.
Yeah.
And then the second thing, I really quite keen to know for the Hague examples as well, that basically the city embrace the conservatory building, and I'm not sure if they're helping to pay the bills or is it part of their budget. So good luck with that. So I would like to hear from you later on.
We're all jealous of The Hague in many ways, but I mean, you've got a gorgeous building, but I think you've got high rent, right? They don't yeah, very high rent. So
Okay.
it's there, but it's a heavy cost. Yeah.
Okay, so it is a balance then.
Yes.
I'm not sure. So maybe there's some way that we can actually let people outside know a bit
Well,
more about our bills. Would that
one of my
help?
favorite things to do, what you just described, I love when I can take a politician back behind the scenes, not just to see a violinist practicing, but to see one of our set makers using hammer, nails, and welding tools. And the director of education said, I didn't realize you have carpenters here. But I have to do that with every single one because he's moved on to another ministry within 6 months. So you have to keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. But it's a great point.
Thank you. So the fifth P, persevere.
Persevere.
Good luck.
Thank you all.